Now that your husband is dead, grieve, pack your bags, and never come back. My daughter-in-law said those words across the dinner table as calmly as if she were asking someone to pass the salt. My son didn't argue. He didn't even look surprised. He simply nodded. And in that moment, after 37 years of raising him, feeding him, worrying about him, loving him, I realized something that chilled me more than the October wind rattling the windows of our home. I was no longer family. I was an inconvenience. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm glad you're here with me today. Stay with my story until the end, and if you feel comfortable, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It always amazes me to see how far stories like mine can travel. My name is Loretta Whitmore. I turned 65 last spring. For most of my life, I believed my greatest success was my family. Now I know better. The dining room still smelled faintly of lilies from my husband's funeral. They were everywhere that week, on the piano, on the hallway table, even on the kitchen counter where I had pushed them aside so I could cook dinner that night. Too many flowers. Too many reminders. Too much silence. My husband Daniel had died just 7 days earlier. 42 years of marriage ended by a heart attack that arrived without warning while he was trimming the rose bushes in our backyard. 1 minute he was outside humming that old Frank Sinatra song he loved. The next minute, he was gone. The house had felt different ever since. Quieter. Hollow. I still caught myself expecting to hear his footsteps in the hallway or the soft creak of the recliner when he sat down with the evening paper. But every time I looked up, there was only emptiness. That evening was the first time my son and his wife had come over since the funeral. I had spent the entire afternoon preparing dinner, even though grief made my hands tremble while I chopped vegetables. Cooking had always been my way of taking care of the people I loved. And if there was ever a moment when our family needed comfort, I thought it was now. I made Daniel's favorite meal. Pot roast. Mashed potatoes with butter. Green beans with garlic. And the apple pie. My son Elliot used to beg for when he was little. The table was set with our best china, the same set Daniel and I had received as a wedding gift back in 1982. I lit 2 candles. Not because it was romantic, but because the room felt too dark without them. At 6:15 p.m., the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and opened the door. Elliot stood there in a navy jacket that looked too expensive for a casual family dinner. Beside him was Meadow, my daughter-in-law. She wore a cream-colored sweater dress and a polite smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Hi, Mom," Elliot said, giving me a quick hug. Meadow leaned forward and brushed my cheek with hers. "Loretta," she said softly. "How are you holding up?" It was the kind of question people ask when they already know the answer doesn't matter. "I'm managing," I said. That had become my standard reply. Managing. Not living. Not healing. Just managing. They stepped inside. For a moment, the house felt almost normal again. Almost. We sat down at the table. The candles flickered softly, casting warm light across the mahogany surface Daniel had polished every Sunday morning for years. Elliot scrolled briefly through his phone before setting it beside his plate. Meadow adjusted her napkin carefully across her lap. Neither of them mentioned Daniel. Neither of them looked at his empty chair. I noticed everything. Grief has a strange way of sharpening your senses. Small details become impossible to ignore. The way Elliot avoided my eyes. The way Meadow's gaze drifted around the dining room as if she were evaluating something. Like a realtor inspecting a property. "Dinner smells wonderful," Elliot finally said. "Thank you," I replied. We began eating. The only sounds in the room were forks touching plates and the occasional crackle from the candles. After a few minutes, I tried to fill the silence. "The service last week was beautiful," I said gently. Your father would have been touched to see so many people there. Elliot nodded without looking up. Yeah, he murmured. Meadow set her fork down slowly. There was something deliberate about the way she did it, as if she were preparing for a conversation she had rehearsed. Actually, she said, folding her hands on the table, that's something Elliot and I wanted to discuss with you. My stomach tightened. I glanced between them. What is it? Elliot cleared his throat. Mom, this house is pretty big. I blinked. Yes, I said carefully. Daniel and I had bought it when Elliot was 8 years old. 4 bedrooms. A wide backyard. A white porch swing Daniel built himself. It wasn't just a house. It was our life. Meadow leaned slightly forward. And now that Daniel is gone, she continued, it might be a lot for you to handle. Her tone was polite. Too polite. The kind of politeness that hides something sharp underneath. I've been taking care of this house for over 30 years, I said quietly. Yes, of course, Meadow replied quickly. But things change. Elliot shifted in his chair. Mom, we just think it might make more sense for you to move somewhere smaller. The words landed like cold water down my spine. Move. Meadow nodded sympathetically. There are wonderful senior communities nearby, she said. Places with activities, friends your own age, less maintenance. I stared at her. Senior communities. After 1 week. 1 week after my husband's funeral. I turned to my son. Elliot, I said softly, you want me to leave the house your father and I built together? He didn't meet my eyes. Well, eventually, yeah. I mean, it's just practical. Meadow's lips curved slightly. And to be honest, she added, Elliot and I could really use the space. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I gripped the edge of the table. You want my house? Meadow sighed. Loretta, please don't make this emotional. Emotional. As if the past 42 years of my life were nothing more than a business transaction. Then she said the sentence I will never forget. The sentence that ended whatever illusion I still had about family. She leaned back in her chair and looked at me with calm indifference. Now that your husband is dead, she said, you should grieve, pack your bags, and never come back. The candle flames flickered. Somewhere in the distance, a car drove past the house. And my son, the boy I once carried on my hip through grocery stores and soccer fields, simply smiled and nodded. She's right, Mom, he said. This house was Dad's anyway. For a moment, the world went completely silent. Then something inside me shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Like a door closing. And in that silence, I realized something important. They thought I was powerless. They thought grief had made me weak. They thought I would pack my bags and disappear from their lives without a fight. I slowly placed my napkin on the table. And I stood up. What they didn't know was that the very next morning, I was going to visit Daniel's attorney. And the documents waiting in his office were about to change everything they thought they knew about this house, and about me. But that part of the story begins the next day. The house felt wrong the morning after that dinner. Not broken. Not chaotic. Just hollow. I woke up before sunrise, the same way I had for decades. Daniel used to tease me about it. He would roll over in bed and mumble that no one should be awake before the coffee was ready. Now the bed beside me was cold. I sat up slowly, listening. The house used to have sounds. Small ones. Daniel clearing his throat in the hallway. The newspaper rustling in the living room. The back door creaking when he stepped outside to check the roses. That morning there was nothing. Just silence pressing against the walls. I slipped on my robe and walked to the kitchen. The coffee machine hummed softly while the sky outside the window slowly turned pale blue. The backyard looked exactly the same as it had every morning for 30 years. Except Daniel wasn't standing out there anymore. For a moment, I forgot. I poured 2 cups of coffee. Then I stopped. I stared at the second mug for several seconds before quietly pouring it back into the pot. Grief sneaks up on you like that. Your hands remember habits long after your mind understands the truth. I carried my coffee to the dining room. The table was still set from the night before. My son's chair was pushed slightly back. Meadow's napkin sat neatly folded beside her plate, like a guest who planned to return. The candle had burned almost completely down. A thin stream of hardened wax had spilled across the china plate beneath it. I sat down slowly. For the first time since Daniel died, I allowed myself to replay the conversation from the night before. Every word. Every glance. Every silence. Now that your husband is dead, pack your bags and never come back. Meadow had said it so calmly. Like she had rehearsed it. What unsettled me more was Elliot's reaction. Or rather, his lack of one. My son had not defended me. He hadn't even looked uncomfortable. He had simply agreed. I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug and stared at the empty chair where Daniel used to sit. 37 years of raising a child teaches you many things. But one of the hardest lessons is realizing that somewhere along the way, that child became a stranger. And as I sat there, another realization began forming quietly in the back of my mind. That dinner hadn't been emotional. It had been strategic. They weren't grieving Daniel. They were discussing property. The house. I looked around the dining room slowly. Every corner of this place held a memory. Elliot taking his first steps across this very floor. Daniel teaching him how to ride a bike in the driveway. Christmas mornings where wrapping paper covered the living room carpet. This house wasn't just wood and brick. It was 42 years of life. And suddenly my daughter-in-law was treating it like a piece of real estate she had already claimed. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. 2 months ago Meadow had asked me a question while we were washing dishes together. Loretta, do you and Daniel have a will? At the time, I thought she was just being practical. Responsible. Now that question sounded very different. 3 weeks before Daniel died, Elliot had asked something else. How much are the property taxes here now? I hadn't thought twice about it then. But sitting there that morning, with the cold sunlight creeping across the table, those little questions no longer felt innocent. They felt like preparation. I stood up slowly and walked toward the living room. Daniel's photograph rested on the mantel. It was from our trip to Maine 3 years ago. He was smiling the way he always did, calm, steady, confident. Daniel had always been good at reading people. Much better than I was. And suddenly I remembered something he had said to me months earlier while we were sitting on the porch swing. Loretta, he had said quietly, if anything ever happens to me, promise you'll speak to Mr. Hargrove before you make any decisions about this house. At the time I had laughed. Nothing's going to happen to you, I told him. But Daniel insisted. Just promise me. I promised. Standing there in the quiet living room, I realized something that sent a chill through me. Maybe my husband had seen something I hadn't. And if that was true, then the conversation at dinner last night was only the beginning. After that morning, the house felt like it was holding its breath. I moved through the room slowly, touching things without thinking. The back of a chair. The edge of the kitchen counter. The doorframe Daniel had measured Elliot against every birthday when he was growing up. Little pencil marks were still there. Age 6. Age 10. Age 16. For a long time, I stood there looking at them. It's strange how memories behave when grief and betrayal arrive at the same time. Old moments begin to rearrange themselves. Things you once believed were ordinary suddenly start to look different. That morning, I started remembering small things. Things I had ignored. 6 months ago, Meadow began coming to our house more often when Daniel wasn't home. At first, I thought she was just trying to build a better relationship with me. She would stand in the kitchen while I cooked and ask casual questions. How long have you and Daniel owned this place? Did you ever think about downsizing? Do you keep most of your documents here or in a safe deposit box? At the time, I answered politely. I assumed she was just making conversation. Now those questions echoed differently in my mind. Like someone mapping a house before deciding how to move into it. Another memory surfaced. 3 months ago, Elliot had walked through the living room studying the walls and windows like he was seeing them for the first time. You know, he had said casually, this place could really increase in value if it were renovated. Daniel looked up from his chair and gave him a long, quiet look. What's wrong with it the way it is? Daniel asked. Elliot shrugged. Nothing. Just saying. Daniel didn't argue. But later that night, while we were getting ready for bed, he said something that stayed with me. Meadow has a way of planting ideas in Elliot's head. I remember laughing a little when he said it. Daniel, you're imagining things. Maybe he wasn't. I walked back into the dining room. The sunlight was stronger now, stretching across the table where the argument had happened the night before. I could almost hear Meadow's voice again. Pack your bags and never come back, the words had sounded cruel. But what bothered me more now was how prepared she had been. People don't say something like that by accident. They say it when they believe the ground beneath them is already secure. I sat down slowly. Another memory surfaced. 2 weeks before Daniel died, Meadow had insisted we all have dinner together here. She barely touched her food that night. Instead, she kept asking questions about the house. The plumbing. The electrical system. Whether the basement ever flooded during heavy rain. At the time, I thought she was being curious. Daniel noticed something different. After they left that evening, he stood at the window watching their car disappear down the street. Then he said quietly, "She's already planning something." I remember shaking my head. "You're being paranoid." Daniel didn't respond. He simply walked over to the mantel and adjusted the frame of our wedding photograph. Looking back now, I realized something painful. My husband had seen the storm coming long before I did. And the dinner last night confirmed what he had been worried about. Meadow believed the house would soon belong to her and Elliot. Which meant one thing. She thought there was nothing I could do about it. But there was one thing she didn't know. Daniel had always been careful with our future. Careful in ways even I didn't fully understand yet. And in exactly 1 hour, I would be sitting in Mr. Hargrove's office. The same attorney who had handled Daniel's affairs for more than 20 years. If my husband had left instructions behind, that was where I would find them. And somehow, deep in my chest, I felt something beginning to shift. Not anger. Not revenge. Something quieter. The slow realization that the story Meadow believed she was writing for my life might not end the way she expected. Mr. Hargrove's office sat on the second floor of a quiet brick building downtown. Daniel had been working with him for more than 20 years. Wills, insurance papers, property records, anything important always passed through that office. I hadn't visited in years. Daniel usually handled those things. The waiting room looked exactly the way I remembered it. Dark wooden furniture. A small coffee table with neatly stacked magazines. No one ever read. A tall window that let in soft morning light. The receptionist recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said gently. "I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I replied. My voice sounded calm, even to me. But inside, my thoughts were moving quickly. She told me Mr. Hargrove would see me in a moment. I sat down and folded my hands in my lap. Across the room, a clock ticked steadily on the wall. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. 30. The sound reminded me of the quiet mornings Daniel and I used to share before Elliot woke up for school. He would sit at the table reading the newspaper while I made breakfast. Back then, everything in life felt simple. Family meant loyalty. Marriage meant trust. And children were supposed to grow up remembering the sacrifices their parents made. The door to the inner office opened. "Loretta," Mr. Hargrove said warmly. "Please come in." He was older now than the last time I saw him. More gray in his hair. But his voice carried the same steady calm Daniel always respected. His office smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. He gestured for me to sit. "I was expecting you," he said. That sentence caught my attention immediately. "Expecting me?" I asked. Mr. Hargrove nodded slowly. "Yes. Daniel asked me to meet with you if anything ever happened to him." For a moment, I didn't speak. Daniel had planned this. Carefully. Mr. Hargrove opened a thick folder on his desk. Inside were several documents, neatly organized. "Your husband updated his estate documents about 8 months ago," he explained. He was very specific about how things should be handled. I felt a strange mix of sadness and curiosity settle in my chest. Daniel had always been a careful man. Practical. Thoughtful. Still, I hadn't expected him to leave instructions beyond the usual legal paperwork. Mr. Hargrove adjusted his glasses and looked directly at me. "Before we discuss the details," he said, "I should tell you something Daniel made very clear." I leaned forward slightly. "He told me," Mr. Hargrove continued, "that you might face pressure regarding the house." Pressure. That word echoed quietly in the room. "He believed certain members of your family might try to convince you to move out sooner than you should." For a moment, Meadows' voice flashed through my mind again. Pack your bags and never come back. I didn't say anything. I simply nodded slowly. Mr. Hargrove seemed to understand. He turned one of the documents toward me and rested his hand on the edge of the desk. "Daniel loved you very much, Loretta," he said. "And he wanted to make sure you were protected." My eyes moved down to the paper. The words were written in precise legal language. But even before I finished reading the first paragraph, I understood something important. The house. The one Meadow believed she could claim. The one Elliot assumed would soon belong to him. Daniel had made sure things would not be that simple. Not at all. I looked back up at Mr. Hargrove. "What exactly did my husband put in place?" I asked quietly. Mr. Hargrove leaned back in his chair. And the faintest hint of a knowing smile crossed his face. "Well," he said calmly, "that's where things start to get interesting." Mr. Hargrove slid the document a little closer to me. I read the first paragraph again, more slowly this time. Legal language has a way of hiding its meaning behind long sentences, but the message beneath it was clear enough. Daniel had transferred the ownership structure of the house. Not to Elliot. Not to anyone else. To a living trust. My name was listed as the sole lifetime beneficiary. Which meant one very important thing. As long as I was alive, the house was legally mine to live in, control, and manage. No one, not Elliot, not Meadow, could sell it, move into it, or force me out. Not without my permission. I leaned back slightly in the chair. For the first time since Daniel's funeral, I felt something inside my chest loosen. Not relief exactly. More like understanding. Mr. Hargrove watched my reaction carefully. "Your husband was very deliberate about this," he said. "I didn't even know he made these changes," I admitted quietly. "That was intentional," Mr. Hargrove replied. "Daniel had always believed that protection works best when it's quiet." He opened another page inside the folder. "There's also a second provision you should understand." I waited. After your lifetime, he explained, the house will eventually pass to Elliot. But only under certain conditions. The word conditions caught my attention immediately. What kind of conditions? I asked. Mr. Hargrove folded his hands on the desk. Daniel wrote a clause stating that the property cannot be transferred to Elliot until 5 years after your passing. I blinked. 5 years. That prevents immediate sale or outside influence, he added. Outside influence. Even the lawyer was being polite about what Daniel had suspected. Meadow. Mr. Hargrove continued. Your husband was concerned that someone might pressure Elliot to sell the property quickly. I remembered Daniel standing at the living room window months ago, quietly watching Elliot and Meadow drive away. She's already planning something. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Now it was obvious. He had seen exactly what was coming. Mr. Hargrove gently closed the folder. There is one more thing Daniel asked me to tell you. I looked up. He said that if anyone ever tried to force you out of your own home, you should remember that the law is very clear. Mr. Hargrove paused for a moment. Loretta, no one can remove you from that house. The words settled quietly into the room. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I stared down at the polished wood of his desk and thought about the dinner the night before. Meadow's voice. Cold. Certain. Pack your bags and never come back. The confidence behind those words made sense now. She thought the house already belonged to Elliot. She thought I was just a temporary guest in my own life. But Daniel had known better. He had built something stronger than assumptions. He had built protection. I stood slowly. Thank you, Mr. Hargrove, I said. He gave me a small, respectful nod. Your husband trusted you to handle things with dignity, he said. That word stayed with me as I walked out of the office. Dignity. Outside, the morning sun had fully risen. The city streets were busy with people heading to work, coffee cups in their hands, lives moving forward as usual. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing in the cool air. The grief was still there. The betrayal was still there. But something else had joined them now. Clarity. Meadow believed she had already won. She believed the house was waiting for her. And the next time she walked through that front door, she was going to discover how wrong she was. When I returned home that afternoon, the house looked exactly the same. The white porch. The rose bushes Daniel planted 20 years ago. The porch swing moving gently in the wind. But something inside me had changed. The night before, when Meadow told me to pack my bags, I had felt stunned. Almost numb. Now I understood something important. I wasn't powerless. Daniel had made sure of that. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The familiar creak of the wood echoed softly through the hallway. For a moment I stood there, letting the quiet settle around me. This house had held our entire life. Elliot's first birthday party in the living room. The Christmas morning when Daniel surprised me with the piano that still sat in the corner. Summer evenings when we grilled in the backyard and laughed until the fireflies came out. Every wall carried a memory. And Meadow believed she could simply erase me from it. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. The sunlight coming through the window was warm now, bright enough to fill the entire room. For the first time since Daniel died, I didn't feel like the house was collapsing around me. Instead, it felt steady. Solid. Protected. My phone rang on the counter. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. Elliot. I let it ring twice before answering. Hi, Mom, he said. His voice sounded casual. Almost cheerful. Like the conversation at dinner the night before had never happened. Hi, Elliot. There was a brief pause. So, he said, Meadow and I were talking this morning. Of course they were. We were thinking it might be good to start looking at some retirement communities for you. I didn't answer right away. Through the kitchen window I could see Daniel's garden tools leaning against the fence where he left them. The rake. The watering can. The small wooden bench he built with Elliot when Elliot was 12. For years, I had been the person who avoided conflict. The one who smoothed over family tension. The one who kept the peace. But peace only works when everyone values it. Elliot, I said quietly, I'm not moving. The silence on the other end of the phone was immediate. What do you mean? He asked. I mean exactly that, I replied. This is my home. Another pause. Then Elliot sighed, the same impatient sound he used to make when he was a teenager and didn't like the answer he heard. Mom, you're not thinking about this logically. I almost smiled. That word again. Logical. Like grief, marriage, and 42 years of life could be reduced to a practical decision. I am thinking clearly, I said. And I'm staying. Elliot didn't speak for several seconds. When he finally did, his tone had changed. Harder. Well, he said, that's going to make things difficult. Difficult. The word hung in the air between us. But what Elliot didn't understand yet was that difficult for him and Meadow might look very different from what they expected. Because for the first time since Daniel died, I had stopped reacting and started paying attention. And something told me this conversation was only the beginning. Meadow wasn't the kind of person who accepted no easily. Which meant she would try something else soon. Something bigger. Something meant to push me out for good. What she didn't realize yet was that Daniel had already prepared me for that moment. 3 days passed after that phone call. 3 quiet days. No messages. No visits. No apologies. At first, I thought Elliot and Meadow might simply be waiting. People like Meadow rarely abandon a plan. They usually just pause long enough to figure out a different approach. On the 3rd morning, I was watering the roses in the backyard when a black SUV pulled into the driveway. I recognized the car immediately. Elliot stepped out of the driver's seat. Meadow followed a moment later, wearing sunglasses even though the sky was overcast. They hadn't called first. That alone told me something important. When people come without warning, it usually means they believe the conversation is already decided. I turned off the hose and walked slowly toward the porch. Good morning, I said. Meadow gave me a quick smile. Loretta, she said sweetly, as if nothing unpleasant had ever happened between us. Elliot kept his hands in his pockets. We thought we should talk in person, he said. I opened the door and stepped aside. They walked into the house like they had every right to be there. Meadow's eyes moved around the living room again, the same way they had the night of the dinner. Noticing the furniture. The walls. The space. Evaluating. I had seen that look before. People use it when they imagine what something will look like after it belongs to them. We sat at the dining table. The same table where Meadow had told me to pack my bags. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Meadow placed a folder on the table. I think we should all try to be reasonable here, she said calmly. The word reasonable again. She opened the folder and turned it toward me. Inside were several printed pages. Photographs. Brochures. Retirement communities. One of them had a picture of a cheerful gray-haired couple walking through a garden path. Another showed a dining hall with round tables and smiling staff members. Elliot and I visited these places yesterday, Meadow said. They're very nice. Comfortable. Safe. She slid the papers a little closer to me. And much easier for someone your age. Someone your age. I glanced at Elliot. He didn't say anything. He simply watched me, waiting for my reaction. Meadow, I said quietly, I already told Elliot I'm not moving. Her smile didn't disappear. But it changed. Slightly tighter. You might not have a choice, she replied. The room became very still. What do you mean? I asked. Elliot shifted in his chair. Well, the house legally belongs to Dad, he said. And now that he's gone, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The assumption was clear. They believed the house would naturally become his. Meadow leaned forward slightly. We're trying to make this easy for everyone, she said. If you move willingly, the transition will be smoother. Transition. Like my life was some kind of furniture arrangement. I folded my hands on the table. For years, I had been patient with Meadow. Polite. Careful not to upset Elliot by questioning her behavior. But patience only works when the other person recognizes kindness. Meadow didn't see kindness. She saw weakness. I'm staying in my home, I said calmly. The smile finally vanished from her face. For the first time since she walked in the door, her expression hardened. You're being stubborn, she said. No, I replied. I'm being clear. The silence that followed stretched across the room. Then Meadow said something that told me exactly how confident she felt. Eventually, she said quietly, this house will belong to Elliot anyway. I looked directly at her. And for the first time since Daniel died, I felt something close to calm. Because Meadow believed she understood the situation. She believed the law was on her side. She believed time would solve the problem for her. What she didn't know yet was that Daniel had already made sure her plan would never work the way she imagined. The room stayed silent after Meadow said it. Eventually this house will belong to Elliot anyway, she said it with complete confidence. Like the outcome had already been decided. Elliot didn't correct her. He didn't even look uncertain. That was the moment I realized something important. They had already convinced themselves that time was on their side. All they had to do was pressure me long enough, and eventually I would give in. I sat quietly for a few seconds, letting the silence stretch. Meadow watched me carefully. She was waiting for emotion. Anger. Tears. Something she could dismiss as weakness. Instead, I simply stood up from the table. Wait here, I said. Neither of them spoke as I walked into the living room. The afternoon sunlight was falling across the mantel where Daniel's photograph stood. For a moment, I looked at his face. That same calm smile. The one that had always made me feel steady, even during difficult moments. You knew, didn't you? I murmured quietly. Daniel had seen this coming long before I had. And he had prepared for it. I opened the drawer of the small writing desk beside the window. Inside was the folder Mr. Hargrove had given me earlier that morning. I carried it back into the dining room. Meadow straightened slightly in her chair when she saw the documents in my hands. What's that? She asked. I placed the folder gently on the table. Something Daniel arranged before he died, I said. Elliot frowned. What do you mean? I slid the first document across the table toward him. The heading was clear. Whitmore Family Trust Agreement. Elliot leaned forward and began reading. At first his expression didn't change. Then his eyes slowed. He read the same paragraph twice. Meadow leaned closer. What does it say? She asked. Elliot didn't answer immediately. He turned the page. Read another paragraph. Then another. Finally he looked up at me. Mom, what is this? I folded my hands calmly. It means the house belongs to a trust Daniel created, I said. And I am the lifetime beneficiary. Meadow's expression tightened. That doesn't make sense, she said quickly. It makes perfect sense, I replied. It means I live here for the rest of my life. Elliot stared at the papers again. And after that? He asked. After that, I said quietly, the property will eventually pass to you. Meadow relaxed slightly. For about 2 seconds. Then Elliot reached the next page. His eyebrows pulled together. 5 years, he said. Meadow blinked. What? Elliot pointed at the clause. It says the house cannot be transferred or sold for 5 years after Mom's passing. The words landed in the room like a stone dropping into still water. Meadow grabbed the document from him and read it herself. Her face slowly changed color. This is ridiculous, she said. It's legal, I replied calmly. No one can force me out of this house. Meadow looked up at me sharply. For the first time since she walked through my door, her confidence had cracked. But Elliot inherits the house, she insisted. Yes, I said. Eventually. The word hung between us. Eventually. Not today. Not next month. Not even after I'm gone. 5 years. 5 years where the house would remain exactly as Daniel intended. Protected. Meadow closed the folder slowly. Her jaw tightened. And in that moment, I realized something else. People like Meadow don't give up easily. When the law blocks their path, they usually try something else. Something more aggressive. And the look in her eyes told me very clearly. This conversation was far from over. For several seconds after Meadow finished reading the document, no one spoke. The room felt different now. The confidence she had carried into my house had disappeared. Not completely, but enough that the air had shifted. Meadow placed the papers back on the table slowly. This can't be right, she said. Her voice wasn't calm anymore. It had a tight edge to it. Elliot was still staring at the trust agreement, reading the same section again. It's right, he said quietly. You saw the lawyer today, he asked me. Yes. And this is legally binding? Yes. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply answered. For a moment, Elliot leaned back in his chair and rubbed his forehead. The room was silent again. Then Meadow stood up abruptly. This is unbelievable, she said. She began pacing slowly across the dining room floor. You're telling me Daniel set this up so the house just sits here for years? No, I replied calmly. Daniel set it up so I could live here in peace. She stopped walking. Her eyes narrowed slightly. That's not realistic, she said. It is legally realistic, I answered. Elliot exhaled slowly. Mom, why didn't Dad ever tell me about this? That question sat in the air between us. I thought about Daniel standing at the living room window months earlier, watching Elliot and Meadow drive away. She's already planning something, he probably had his reasons, I said. Elliot didn't respond. But Meadow did. You can't seriously expect us to just wait around forever, she said sharply. I looked at her. I'm not expecting anything from you. Her expression hardened again. The polite tone she usually used was gone now. You're being selfish, she said. That word would have hurt me once. Years ago, I might have apologized just to keep the peace. But something had changed. Selfish? I repeated quietly. Yes, Meadow said. Elliot is your son. This house should eventually help his future. Her words were carefully chosen. But the meaning underneath them was obvious. She wasn't thinking about Elliot's future. She was thinking about her own. I stood up slowly from my chair. For 42 years, I said calmly, Daniel and I built this home. I looked around the room. Every room here holds part of our lives. Then I looked directly at Elliot. And Daniel made sure I could stay here for the rest of mine. Elliot didn't argue. He simply looked tired. Meadow, however, wasn't finished. She leaned forward slightly across the table. You might live here, she said quietly. But you can't stop life from moving forward. I knew what she meant. Pressure. Patience. Time. People like Meadow rarely attack all at once. They wear people down slowly. Small arguments. Small inconveniences. Small conflicts that build over time. Eventually, most people give up just to make the tension stop. She believed that was what would happen here. She believed I would eventually surrender the house to make peace. But Meadow had made one mistake. She assumed grief had made me fragile. In reality, grief had done something else entirely. It had made me see things clearly. And as Elliot and Meadow gathered their things and walked toward the door, I watched them quietly. Because something in Meadow's expression told me this wasn't over. Not even close. When someone realizes their plan has failed, they usually try something more desperate next. And deep down, I had a feeling Meadow was already thinking about her next move. For almost a week after that conversation, the house was quiet again. Too quiet. Elliot didn't call. Meadow didn't send messages. And that kind of silence usually means one thing. People are thinking. Planning. On the 7th morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table when I heard a knock on the front door. Not Elliot's knock. He used to knock 3 times quickly when he was a boy. This knock was slower. More official. When I opened the door, 2 men stood on the porch. Both wore dark jackets and carried small folders. Mrs. Whitmore, one of them asked. Yes. My name is Daniel Foster, he said, showing me a badge. This is my colleague. We're with the County Property Inspection Office. Property inspection. The words immediately caught my attention. We're here regarding a complaint about structural safety concerns with the residents, he continued. Behind them, I saw a familiar car parked at the curb. Meadow's car. She was sitting inside it. Watching the house. Watching me. I understood immediately. If she couldn't force me out legally, she would try another method. The inspector continued speaking. We received a report that the foundation and electrical systems here may present a safety risk. A safety risk. I almost smiled. This house had stood strong for over 30 years. Daniel had repaired every pipe, every outlet, every loose board himself. Nothing in this house was unsafe. But complaints like that can still trigger inspections. And inspections can create problems. Of course, I said calmly. Please come in. The 2 inspectors stepped inside. They walked through the living room, writing notes. Examining walls. Looking at the ceiling beams. I followed them quietly. Through the window, I could still see Meadow sitting in her car. Waiting. Confident. She probably expected the inspection to uncover something serious. Something that could force repairs. Or even temporary relocation. It was clever, in a way. If I couldn't be removed legally, then maybe the house could be declared unsafe. But Meadow had overlooked one important detail. Daniel had never been careless. When the inspectors reached the basement, one of them looked at the electrical panel. Interesting, he murmured. What is it? I asked. This system was upgraded recently, he said. Yes, I replied. My husband replaced the wiring 2 years ago. The inspector nodded. Everything looks professionally installed. They checked the foundation next. One of them tapped the concrete wall with a small metal tool. Solid. No cracks. No water damage. After almost 40 minutes, the 2 inspectors closed their folders. Well, Mr. Foster said politely, I'm happy to report there are no structural or safety issues with the property. I nodded. I suspected there wouldn't be. He smiled slightly. Sometimes complaints come from misunderstandings. Outside, Meadow's car door opened. She stepped out, trying to look casual. But the moment she saw the inspectors walking toward the street shaking their heads, her expression changed. The quiet confidence she carried earlier was gone again. For the second time that week, her plan had failed. She watched as the inspectors drove away. Then she slowly walked toward the house. I stepped onto the porch before she could knock. "Good morning, Meadow," I said. She forced a thin smile. "Just checking in," she replied. But I could see the frustration behind her eyes now. People like Meadow are not used to losing control. And the more control they lose, the more desperate their next move becomes. Standing there on the porch, I realized something. This wasn't about the house anymore. It was about pride. And wounded pride can make people do very foolish things. Meadow stood at the bottom of the porch steps for a moment, looking up at me. Her smile was tight now. The friendly tone she usually used had almost completely disappeared. "Interesting timing," she said. "For what?" I asked calmly. "The inspection," she replied. "You seemed very confident." I didn't answer that. Instead, I simply rested my hand on the porch railing and waited. Silence has a strange effect on people like Meadow. When they can't provoke a reaction, they often start revealing more than they intend. "You know," she continued, "houses this old usually develop problems eventually." "Everything develops problems eventually," I said. Her eyes narrowed slightly. For a moment, we simply stood there looking at each other. Then Elliot's car pulled into the driveway. He stepped out quickly, glancing between us. "What's going on?" he asked. Meadow turned toward him immediately. "Oh, nothing," she said lightly. "Just a routine inspection." Elliot frowned. "Inspection?" I could see confusion spreading across his face. He hadn't known. That detail told me something important. Meadow hadn't included him in this plan. "Your wife reported the house for structural safety concerns," I said quietly. Elliot blinked. "What?" Meadow's expression stiffened. "I was just being cautious," she said quickly. "You know how old buildings can be." But Elliot wasn't looking at the house. He was looking at her. "You filed a complaint?" he asked. "Well, yes," she admitted. "I thought if there were problems, it would be safer for your mom to relocate somewhere appropriate." Appropriate. The same word she had used before. But this time Elliot didn't nod along. Instead, his face tightened slightly. "And you didn't tell me about this?" he asked. Meadow shrugged. "I didn't think it was a big deal." The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. Elliot looked from Meadow to the house. Then to me. "Were there any problems?" he asked. "No," I said. "The inspectors confirmed everything is fine." Meadow folded her arms. "Well, maybe this time," she muttered. Elliot turned back toward her slowly. "Meadow," he said quietly. There was something different in his voice now. Not anger exactly, but uncertainty. Like he was finally seeing something he hadn't noticed before. For years, Meadow had spoken for him, made decisions for him, directed the conversations. But standing there on the driveway, the situation looked different. Because now he had seen the pattern himself. First the pressure to move. Then the legal argument. Now the inspection complaint. And all of it had one goal. Remove me from the house. Elliot ran a hand across his face. "You should have told me," he said. Meadow's patience finally cracked. "I was trying to solve a problem," she snapped. "What problem?" Elliot asked. "The fact that your mother is sitting in a house that should eventually belong to us." The words slipped out before she could stop them. For a moment, no one spoke. Even Meadow seemed to realize what she had just said. I watched Elliot's face carefully. Because in that moment, something shifted. He looked at the house again. Then at me. Then back at Meadow. And for the first time since Daniel died, my son looked unsure about which side he was standing on. Meadow noticed it too. And the flash of worry in her eyes told me she understood something important. The situation was no longer under her control. Not completely. And once control starts slipping away, the truth has a way of following right behind it. No one spoke for several seconds after Meadow said it. The house that should eventually belong to us, the words hung in the air like something fragile that had finally broken. Elliot stood in the driveway, staring at her. Not angry. Not shouting. Just looking at her in a way I hadn't seen before. Carefully. Like he was hearing something for the first time. Meadow noticed it too. That's not what I meant, she said quickly. But the sentence had already landed. You can't pull words like that back once they've been said. Elliot turned toward the house. The porch. The garden. The windows that had watched him grow up. I grew up here, he said quietly. His voice sounded different now. Not defensive. Not impatient. Just thoughtful. I learned to ride my bike on that driveway, he continued. Dad built that treehouse in the backyard when I was 10. His eyes moved across the house slowly. And you're talking about it like it's an investment property. Meadow crossed her arms. Well, eventually it will be, she said. Elliot looked back at her. And something in his expression finally hardened. No, he said. It's my parents' home. The silence that followed was deeper than any argument we'd had before. Meadow opened her mouth, but Elliot raised a hand slightly. Just stop, he said. For the first time since Daniel died, my son sounded like the boy I used to know. Not controlled. Not guided. Just thinking for himself. He turned toward me. I'm sorry, Mom. The words were simple. But they carried the weight of something real. I should have listened to Dad more, he said quietly. I didn't answer right away. Because apologies don't fix everything overnight. But they do matter. Especially when they're honest. Meadow looked from him to me, clearly realizing something had shifted in a way she couldn't easily control. Elliot, she said sharply. But he shook his head. We're going home, he said. And this time, the decision came from him. Not from her. They walked back toward the car. Meadow climbed in without another word. Elliot paused for a moment beside the driver's door. Then he looked back at the house one last time. At me. And he nodded slightly before getting in the car. The engine started. The car backed out of the driveway. And for the first time in weeks, the house felt quiet in a different way. Not empty. Peaceful. I walked back inside slowly. The late afternoon sun filled the living room with soft golden light. Daniel's photograph still rested on the mantel. That steady smile. The one that always made me feel like everything would be all right. I stood there for a moment. You knew, I said softly. Daniel had understood something important long before I did. Family isn't just about blood. It's about respect. About loyalty. About protecting the people who stood beside you when life was difficult. He had protected me. Even after he was gone. I sat down on the porch swing as the evening air cooled the garden. The roses moved gently in the breeze. The same way they had every summer Daniel was alive. The house was still standing. Still filled with memories. Still mine. And for the first time since that terrible dinner, I didn't feel like someone who had been pushed out of her own life. I felt like someone who had finally stepped back into it. Because sometimes the greatest strength isn't fighting loudly. Sometimes it's simply refusing to leave the place where your story was built. and letting the truth do the rest.